I'm talking today to Mark Chataway, who is the co-chairman of Baird's CMC. Mark, we're talking today about generic drug manufacturers. How do these manufacturers come into being?
Well, they're a very important part of the system we have for access to medicine. So the system we currently have, the system we've had for the last 50 years or so, is that drug manufacturers discover a medicine. They have a patent life on it of 15, 20 years. Can be a bit less or a bit more depending on the precise circumstances, and at the end of that anybody's free to make the medicine. So that's the theory, at least.
Yeah.
And these generic manufacturers are the ones who then come along after the 15-20 year patent life is up and make much cheaper versions of the medicine. So they're a very important part of the system, and it's really important to have a constant supply of new generic manufacturers coming along to make sure the system doesn't get too comfortable. So clearly it's not in any established player's interest in any market to drive down prices. The idea of having these patent expiries in medicine is that you'll constantly have new people coming along who will aggressively undercut and compete. Exactly. So that's the principle of it.
And of the medicines or the drug bill of the world, how much is generics and how much is patent?
I'm not sure I know the exact figures, but it would depend enormously where you were looking at. So if you're looking at the so-called list of essential medicines, you know, the medicines that a health system says are absolutely essential to public health, the vast majority of those would be generic medicines. In part that's because the drug pipeline has dried up a bit in the last decade, but it's mostly because we've been quite good at treating most of the big causes of public health problems for a fairly long time.
But also too, the public health sector has been bearing down on those costs?
To some extent, but if you look at the way medicine advances, let's take for example a situation like high cholesterol, hypercholesterolemia, which is a big problem in the industrialized world, a growing problem in the emerging economies, because as people's diet becomes richer and worse, their cardiovascular health gets worse. We've had medicines to treat hypercholesterolemia for the last 25, 30 years. What's happened is we've had a series of incremental improvements over the last 25 years. So from the beginning, we've had medicines that could treat most cases and could do it reasonably well. We've then had a series of very gradual steps over 25 years to have medicines that act for longer, work a bit better, work in some sort of resistant cases, are easier to take, have fewer side effects. If your concern is reducing hypercholesterolemia in most patients, reducing high cholesterol in most patients, you can use the 30-year-old medicines. If your concern is, as it is for us in the rich societies, getting people to be as compliant as possible, to take their medicines as often as possible, to feel as little inconvenienced as possible, you may want to use the newer medicines, a few of which are still on patent. So the mix of patent and generic medicines looks very different depending on the characteristics of the society.
And the generics manufacturers are a worldwide phenomenon, but where are the large clusters of generic drug manufacturers?
20 years ago there used to be a fairly clear line between the science-based, the innovative pharmaceutical companies and the generics companies. That's no longer true, because nearly all of the innovative pharmaceutical companies have their own subsidiaries making generics, and they're completely bought into the idea that there's this vital role for generics companies, where they would argue is over how soon,
what the period of patent is,
and what the conditions should be. Historically, though, there have been big clusters, and I suppose the one that everybody thinks about are the Indian generic manufacturers, for a couple of reasons. One, they're really, really good at taking processes, simplifying them, making them more cost-effective, producing medicines which are usually of a very high quality, and doing it much more cheaply than others have managed to do. And Indian companies have been good at this in all sorts of different fields, in technology, in telecoms, and in medicine. The second thing about the Indian companies is that they've been politically pretty aggressive. So a couple of the Indian companies have really been at the forefront of trying to push the markets that are accessible to generic manufacturers, and so they have a very high profile on the world stage. I mean, I think the biggest generic company in the world is still an Israeli company, but politically they're far less.
And that's Teva?
It's Teva, yeah.
Teva, yeah.
Teva.
And these generics companies in India, what scale are they? Do they employ lots of people and they export as well as make for the home market, or?
Absolutely. I mean, it started manufacturing for the home market, then manufacturing for the near home market, and are now enormous suppliers in Europe, in the US, and in the emerging and the least developed countries. I mean, almost certainly any European or American who's taken a medicine in the last 10 years will have taken one made by one of the large Indian generics companies. What is happening to these companies is that they are, of course, becoming established players, employing tens of thousands of people, and they take on the characteristics of an established player in a marketplace. And established players tend to be more risk averse and
wish to keep other players out.
Wish to keep other players out and specialise and so forth. I think one of the strengths of India has been that it has so far encouraged lots of smaller companies to come on behind them and to follow on. So you have hundreds of small generics companies who are specialising and competing and driving costs down in the domestic market. Some moves in the Indian domestic market may limit that in the future, and also the regulatory hurdles.
And what are those moves?
There's an extremely complex pricing discussion going on in India at the moment. The Indian government has proposed that for any given chemical compound there should be a pricing band which is set by taking the average price of all of the brands of that compound available. So let's take the high cholesterol example again. Simvastatin, the world's most used cholesterol lowering medicine. You would take whatever there are 100 brands of Simvastatin available on the Indian market, you would work out the median price of Simvastatin, and that would then become a band within which all medicines had to be priced.
So this is a price control structure?
So it's a price control structure. The argument of the Indian government is that it will reduce the average price. It's almost certainly true, because there are some premium brands. You know, people within India have historically been willing to pay high prices for brands they perceive as more reliable, or as more aspirational even, than brands,
better marketed
and all of that. The danger is that there may be incentives for doctors and for chemists to dispense higher priced rather than lower priced brands. So there may be some people who haven't made a choice.
The choice has been made for them.
The choice has been made for them, and they're paying more than they should. So the Indian government has now introduced regulations that say for about 350 medicines they'll effectively be a price control with a lower price and a higher price, and you can only price within that band. The effect of that may be, I mean, this is hotly contested by people far more expert than me, but maybe to make it more difficult for new companies to enter the market. It may also make it more difficult for multinational companies to charge a premium for their brands. Well, it certainly will. So it'll have an effect both ways.